I want to welcome everyone and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I'm very excited to welcome you to the Utah Trail Forum's second Waypoint webinar. My name is Katie Reiser. I'm the chair of the Utah Trail Forum, and I'll be your host today, along with our dear friends from the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation. I feel extremely honored and grateful to have this opportunity to introduce you all to a group of remarkable individuals who are on the forefront of adaptability and who are redefining disability. And today we're talking about accessibility beyond ADA, the first of many topics related to adaptive recreation that we hope to share. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us. We're excited to see attendees from across North America. We have friends from the Midwest, from Canada, from all of our surrounding states and more. And we thank you. This shows just how eager our industry is to expand our perceptions of accessible trails. This conversation is going to offer unique insights into the realm of adaptive mountain biking, and we'll prepare you to reframe the way you think about disability, access, and of course, trails. To do so, we're going to learn from 5 experts who will shift the way you plan, build, maintain, and even talk about trails. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. First off, we've got Bob Radke. Bob is the owner of Creative Trails LLC from 2018 to present, and previously Sagebrush Trails LLC from 2008 to 2018. Bob has been in the trail industry for 20 years in northern Utah, planning, designing, and building trails. Prior to going into the private sector full-time, Bob worked at Snyderville Basin Recreation in Park City for 17 years. We also have Maggie Geddes. Maggie is currently completing her master's in therapeutic recreation from the University of Utah. After Maggie's injury, she began hand cycling and has worked hard for the past 2 years to become an exceptional cyclist and instructor. Also, she just led an outdoor climbing session this morning and is joining us from the field, so thanks, Maggie. She not only instructs hand cycle lessons for the National Ability Center, but she will be competing in that hand cycle downhill world champs in Crested Butte later this year. We have Wally Lee. Wally's an avid mountain biker and skier. One of his passions is to get others with disabilities out into the mountains as independently as possible. We have Tracy Meyer. Tracy is a certified therapeutic recreation specialist and is the program and education director at the National Ability Center, where she has worked for the past 19 years. She believes that everyone should have the right to recreation and be able to enjoy the benefits that come from sports, recreation, and being in the outdoors. And lastly, we've got Jeffrey Rosenbluth. Jeffrey is a physician at the University of Utah, specializing in spinal cord injury medicine. Since 2001, he's led a team dedicated to accelerating equality in function, performance, and independence for the disabled community through the development of innovative adaptive equipment and recreation and health programs. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for being here. To kick things off, I'd like to ask our audience a question. Think to yourself and drop it in the chat. Is there a soft surface trail in your area that could be used by someone with adaptive cycling equipment? If so, drop in the chat box what trail or what trail system comes to mind. And as you drop those ideas into the chat, we'll prepare to turn things over to our group of experts. These folks will take the next half hour to introduce you all to the world of adaptive mountain biking and begin to break down perceived barriers to accessible trail design. Following their presentation, we'll use the remainder of our time together for Q&A between the audience and our panelists. Without further ado, we'll turn it over to Jeffrey Rosenbluth.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Really happy to be a part of this awesome presentation team and have this opportunity, and hopefully many more, to talk about disability and adaptive recreation and all the things that are being done and can be done to make things even better in our community and around the world. Today we're going to really back up a little bit, and I often like to take the time as sort of a spinal cord and rehab doc just to see what we can do to really reframe our ideas about disability and really talk a little bit about some things that I hope will kind of blow your minds about the kinds of things we're doing early in the rehab course and getting people out back to doing things they want. And Tracy's going to kind of chime in a little bit too and talk about a vision, kind of a vision for trails and a vision for what we could be doing here, and certainly more around the country, and recognizing that lots of good work is happening all over the place. And we're just really trying to bring some of that together, merging the rehabilitation field and the recreation field, and our grassroots community, and our individuals with disabilities who want to recreate. Many of you out there probably know quite a bit about equipment, but not knowing everyone who's on the call, we're going to briefly go over the type of equipment that is out there that we're using on the trails, talk about the trails themselves with our users and a trails designer as well. And then we'd love to talk a little bit about future collaboration, and then hear from you about what else we could be talking about and doing to really try to get on the same page and move forward together and just provide the greatest access that we can. It really is rare for me. I've been doing this for 20 years, but to be able to have people in a room together in rehabilitation and adaptive recreation and the adaptive riding community and government all together trying to kind of look at this issue together is remarkable. So I'm really happy to be here. I mean, this is like 90% of the battle is getting us in a room together. So really happy that that's happening. I work up at the Craig H. Nielsen Rehabilitation Hospital. We just opened in May, and I bring this up primarily for the reason that the primary donor, the Craig Nielsen Foundation, really supported building this building primarily because I believe of the adaptive recreation components that we're trying to bring, especially to folks with very complex disabilities. This was kind of an investment in this community to try to bring recreation back to people's lives really early after their injury and make sure that it really just never leaves. And we are committed to working within the academic system and the community system to do whatever we can to get together and do some really innovative things together. We work on a philosophy up at the hospital of control everything with anything. So we recognize that there's lots of great products and lots of great opportunities out there, but not necessarily for everyone. There's still a certain degree of dependence when trying to access certain trails and activities. And what we would like to do is really try to take any sport, any activity that someone would like to do, and try to make them be able to control it with really anything on their body that they can function. And that can be even the smallest things that I'll show you real quickly. I also wanted to make sure we weren't just picking on the trail system today. This is how we access our lake at East Canyon Reservoir. We have a beautiful accessible ramp that makes it to the water approximately one day a year. And so many challenges out there. We have a dock company, which I will not name, which has really become the standard in adapted docking systems in the entire country, yet it serves as such a small population. People need to have hand function to be able to use the railings. And even the kayak itself is not an adapted kayak, since we actually have to use outriggers often, and they don't really work on these adapted systems. So it's one of the reasons we really called this presentation Beyond ADA. ADA was a basic framework for access, and we're really getting into some really more major stuff that's out there. And I think we just need to all think a little bit deeper about it. I know many of you have already. We're also making a huge effort to make sure that people are reminded that these sports and activities and everything is really available to them really even soon after they've had some type of catastrophic injury. We're taking patients that are injured within 2 weeks of their spinal cord injury and putting them in devices and bringing them out to some of these trails that we're talking about now. We have folks that are on ventilators that are 2 to 3 weeks after their spinal cord injury or are not breathing on their own, that are getting in ski equipment and getting in cycling equipment and making sure that they know that there's a future doing the things that they want to be doing. I mentioned earlier that we're looking at novel interfaces so that people can figure out whatever really works well in their body, no matter how tiny, that it can control very complex machines. We're looking at virtual reality. When people can only come and recreate maybe once or twice a year, maybe they can really gain some significant skills in this type of environment before coming out and playing in the field where it's might be a little bit tougher. All of the sports, including some of the off-road riding that we're talking about, have simulators being developed around them. People can use joystick control systems, mouth control systems in a simulated environment, and then be able to customize those control interfaces and then actually take what they learn in these simulators, which are real-life simulators, and actually bring them to real-life devices. So this is a sailboat / powered kayak, and this is operated just with breath control. And this is a gentleman, a patient of mine, on a ventilator, just completely sailing independently. Sail control, motor control, rudder control, all independently. Accessibility, if you can't get on the beach, we've got to do something. It's difficult to transfer people in and out of some of this equipment, so we may need to develop other equipment to support that equipment. Working with engineers throughout Utah, here or throughout the country, developing things all of the time to really try to make all of these access issues much easier. Even in alpine skiing, we have an electrically controlled and electric actuated ski that is controlled with your joystick or your breath. So even if you have limited hand control or no control over any part of your body other than your breath, you'd be able to control these devices independently. Whether you're 4 years old with muscular dystrophy and are skiing completely independently, the person in the back really just being an emergency brake, or you're a C4 spinal cord injury level with only head function is the only thing, and using little sips and puffs of air to just dramatically and precisely control skis and to be able to ski independently as well. So I wanted to really use that as a background for what you're going to hear kind of moving forward with Tracy and the rest of this team. We're very excited about bringing this vision of access for everyone. Some of the equipment is now available and out there, and now we need to make sure that the community is ready for the equipment and can accept it, and everyone can go play together. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy and have Tracy talk a little bit about the vision for trails and moving forward in additional collaboration.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Our vision for today is that you leave excited about collaborating with all of these different resources. We have amazing resources on this call, and many more people who want people to benefit from recreation. 1 in 4 people in this country have a disability, and the benefits that come from being outside and enjoying our Utah trails is huge. So when you take a look at these photos, what we want you to notice is that we are not asking for paved trails to be built. We are not asking for only accessible trails to be built. Maggie and Wally will chat with you. Like, we want to recreate with our friends and family. And so our ultimate takeaway today is that you will see some small tweaks, some small changes in design as you start to cut new trails, or even some maintenance of the current trails will open up for so many. We're going to talk about equipment. And today we're really talking about mountain biking, but we want you to know that these changes will make a difference for lifelong engagement. So young families going out and enjoying trails, to individuals who are aging and still want to be out and recreating. So changes to those trails are a huge benefit to so many. And when we say accessible in this beyond ADA, we hope that you leave today with, we're not talking about sidewalks and bathrooms. We're talking about recreation access. And we also aren't asking for easy. Wally and Maggie will share with you, they want to go on tough terrain, and as long as it's built in the right way, these guys will kick all of our butts going down the hill. So easy is not what we're asking for. We're asking for some additional thoughts to entry to trail, to size, corners, and then communication of what that trail has. So we're gonna move into equipment, and then we'll ask Maggie and Wally to share a few other thoughts. But let's go on and talk about the different types of equipment. And Wally and Maggie, if you want to share kind of the rigs that you're on and how they benefit you to enjoy all of our awesome trails around here.
Go ahead, Wally. I think you're muted right now. Or Maggie, yeah.
Yeah, this is part of the series of bikes that Reactive Adaptations makes in Crested Butte. Jake O'Connor makes these. This is his full suspension version called the Hammerhead. It's very similar to another one called the Bomber, which is not a front suspension, just a rear suspension. And basically this one is more of a prone position where you're kneeling, the advantage of that is that that one's made actually in Poland called the Explorer, and that's a similar position, a prone position with knee trays. This one is electric assisted. The advantage of this is that you have a little more leverage when you're pedaling. You have more weight on the back tire, so you have more traction on the uphills. But it requires somebody with a little lower level injury. This one is, I think it's the Lasher, which is made in Las Vegas, and it's more of a kind of a traditional, what you would think of a hand bike with the drive wheel on the front. This works great for amputees, for people with legs. It's a little bit more awkward. The turning radius is shorter, but it is more comfortable and can work really well. But you do have the disadvantage of the front drive wheel makes it difficult to go up steep, loose terrain. You'll slide out. This one is called the Nuke and is also made by Reactive Adaptations, and it's probably one of the more common ones next to the Bomber. It's a seated position, hand pedal, very similar to the Bomber in terms of the geometry and the terrain that it can go on. But there are people that have a little higher level of injury, especially with very high functioning quads, where people, maybe T8 and above benefit more from this because you don't need to have as much trunk usage with this. This one is similar, but you can see there's pedals in front. So this is actually a recumbent. So it's actually leg powered and similar kind of geometry with the wheels in the front. The reason that a lot of these have the wheels in the front is mainly so that the drive wheel is in the back, which gives a lot more traction, especially on dirt trails. And this one has very large fat tires, and same with this one. This one is called the Mako, which is the full suspension version of the Nuke, which we saw 2 slides earlier. This one also uses larger tires, which does cause a little bit more friction, but it does add kind of micro suspension, making small bumps really palatable, and also is good for sandy terrain, and people use these in the wintertime, which originally what these tires were made for.
Wally, will you also address just the grip system, that even without significant hand function, that we're getting folks out there riding as well?
Yeah, so there's a lot of modifications that people need to do, especially people with neck injuries that don't have very good use of their hands. There are adaptive grips that need to be applied to the hand, to the pedals, and some of these, all of these will have, you can steer actually while you're pedaling. The steering doesn't have a lot of leverage, but on this bike you can steer from both. But if you look at the handlebar, you see this kind of 3-prong thing coming off that's actually for a person to use their wrist and kind of this motion for braking. And this one has an e-assist, so people who have higher level injuries are going to need more adaptations to the equipment and are going to need assistance for propelling them, which is largely e-assist.
Hey, Wally, as we've gone through, we're seeing mostly 3-wheel, some 4-wheel. That really helps us on that trail development for that width and different aspects that way. And we're going to move into some trail discussion here. Do you mind telling us the bike you ride? And that question I told you I was going to ask, which Maggie, I'm going to ask you next. Tell us about a recent ride that you've been on that was really successful based on that trail design. And let us know maybe a recent ride you went on where, based on the bike that you're riding, where it wasn't successful.
Yeah, I ride a bike called the Bomber, which is very similar to the first picture with the kneeling trays. Yeah, it's very similar to this without the suspension in the front. There's one rear suspension. There was a question in the chat about the width. Almost all of the bikes that Jake makes are 33 inches wide in the front. And so a trail that is 3 feet wide is very easy to negotiate compared to a single track. A lot of trails, Jeff and I were talking about what equipment was being used, and I went and looked at these company called Sutter that makes these trail dozers, and you can see why the newer trails tend to be wider because of the use of that equipment. I've been riding quite a bit lately near the Powder Mountain area, and most of those trails were made with those trail dozers. So I would say majority of the trails that I've ridden around there have been very easy to negotiate for an experienced hand cyclist. Not a lot of off-camber, trails are wide enough, and they do get overgrown and narrow, but the original trail was wide, so it's much easier to negotiate. But at the same time, there's an area up by Snow Basin that I rode on, a trail called Sardine Canyon. It's a beautiful trail, but largely single track. And so when you have a single track, the 2 front wheels or 2 back wheels, depending on your configuration, will be out of the trail, either one wheel or both wheels. And so on a flat area, it may not be an issue, but if you have a lot of vegetation, there's a lot of debris and stuff you have to go over. There could be hidden tree bumps and rocks within the brush. So one of the bad rides, I guess not a bad ride, but bad incidences I had lately was I was on that Sardine Trail, and my friend even told me to watch out for a certain section. But there was a single-tracked area on a very steep incline, and that single track had a very, because it's on a steep angle, the uphill side was steep. The downhill part of the trail was eroding off. So I had one wheel in the single track and one wheel kind of up on the uphill side, because if I had on the downhill side, it's too steep. So as I was going, and it was coming down, and as I hit the single track, it was very eroded off, and I just basically slid off and then rolled a couple times down the hill. And fortunately, there were people to help out, but you have to learn how to evacuate. I had to get out of the bike and have someone help me basically drag me out of the bushes. And so these things can be, have a high consequence because you're strapped into these bikes. Because really, in the long run, that's a safer thing. You don't want to be bouncing out of the bike because you can't hold yourself in there.
And Wally, we'll show some of these, some of those trails that you're mentioning, and some of those obstacles too. Tracy, did Maggie have something else too?
Yeah, Maggie, you want to share with us just for as we get into we'll get to some trail design after that, but always good to hear from you. So give us a good experience you've been on and what made it great, and what was added some additional barriers to your ride.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I tried to move to a quieter place. So I also ride the Bomber that kind of looks like this, but no suspension in the front. And I ride a lot in the Park City area. And some of the trails that I have been really successful on, of course, like the Round Valley Trail System, a lot of the trails around there are wide enough to fit these bikes. And there are some trails that will have like technical off-camber areas, and I feel like that is not necessarily we're not asking to take all of those away because that is part of the fun, but in some areas where the trails are narrower, last week Steph and I rode at the Park City Mountain Resort, and there was a lot of trails there that I had to have major spotting on, where it was very thin trails with high consequence exposure areas. So when that happens, someone has to jump off their bike and come stand on the uphill side, spotting that wheel that's higher so that we don't tip over. And if those trails were just like a few inches wider on each side, that would solve so much of that terrifying feeling of rolling over the cliff of the mountain. So there's like a lot of trails that we can ride, but there are also a lot of trails that are like this narrow, made for one-wheel bikes. And it would be so cool just to have those a few inches on each side So not necessarily building a whole new trail, but just adapting those trails to where they're a little bit wider. It doesn't take much away from the enjoyment for upright riders, but it just makes it to where it's accessible for us to be able to access some really cool areas that we haven't been able to access so far.
So I think that's a great segue, I think, into the trails, Tracy. And the last two bikes, just so you know, that there are, some of those bikes are difficult to ride depending on what your injury is and the position that you're in. And there are more upright ones as well. There are ones that are totally electric and have no pedal power. And we're going to tread lightly in the electric power area today. But I will say, and I think that the panel will support this, is that the advent of power assist and the e-assist has been an absolute almost like miracle for getting a huge population out and recreating at a very high level of physical output, considering they're using often, no trunk and rather weak upper extremities as well. So I know we'll probably need another session to really explore all the ins and outs of this, but it really has been a game changer in the rehab and adaptive recreation community.
Jeff, I'll just show a good plug on, we're going to invite you to come and check out some of these bikes at some point, and that'll really help explain that. So that'll be a good plug for that.
Yeah. The last bike is there's a group of bikes and skis, especially in Europe, where the instructor and client or rider are together. And so for some folks that really have, are really going to not be safe riding, whether it's downhill only or pedal independently, they're actually with an instructor. So there's some really interesting things that are out there. So why don't we move on to trails and really sort of start to go through that. Tracy, do you want to start to take us through this?
Sure, and we've got Creative Trails here too, right, Bob? So you jump in. Yeah, let's do this. So I think, we have Jeff put together this amazing presentation with some great photos for you, and we're talking a lot about trails, but we've also noticed that sometimes those entry points can be difficult, and so noting here an awesome accessible trail that's wide enough. We're adaptable. We like to get creative, but on that independent piece, as we start to design more trails and more trailheads, that's an area that we would want to focus on as those entry points. And then user groups, thinking you saw those cool bikes and this awesome technology, lower to the ground, more difficult to get close to reading information about that trail and that sort of thing. So small little tweaks that will make a huge difference for a lot of users. You're getting here, having to go underneath. It's wide enough, right, that this bike can fit through. So we can kind of scroll through these. Bob, you have some additions you want to add on? Oh, Bob, you're on mute up there. The joy of, there you go.
No, all these tweaks, seem very simple, to do, and even could be, a lot of these areas could be modified really easily. I saw one chat thing about ATVs, keeping them off and everything, but most ATVs are wider than 42 inches. And so, that's pretty safe, to make everything 42 inches wide, and the hand cycles will fit. You can keep a lot of other things out, but as a trail builder, I'm excited to see this direction, that there's not major specifications for trails that, to build specially for adaptive cycles and everything. So it's really cool.
And Wally and Maggie, not having ridden with you guys before, I would imagine that riding along and everything's great, and then you get to some pinch point like this is quite a challenge.
Yeah, I would agree that there are many, many rides. I would say most of the rides that I do, there's very few that are, not typical for hand cyclists, but rides that I would love to do. There's 2 or 3 places where if it was 1 or 2 things simply modified would make the risk a lot lower. The other thing is trying to ride independently. Like if you came across a situation like this, if you slid down and I was by myself, I'm kind of hosed. And so, something like this I see very frequently. And it really doesn't take much.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's more enjoyable for anyone riding a bike to go with other people, but having that independence is just so much more, just the quality of the ride is so much better when the person behind you doesn't have to jump off every couple seconds to spot you or help you. So riding completely independent is like a great feat, but also having someone with you, not having to jump off every few minutes to help you over obstacles and spot you over these tricky sections when it could be fixed with a few simple adaptions is just would be very helpful.
And while you and I were talking about sometimes, it seems like naturally double track would be, quote, wide enough, and would be great. Do you want to comment, though, on what some experiences are with double track and how that's sometimes even worse?
Yeah, double track was made for vehicles. And so there's usually it's often like on this one here, I think this is at Round Valley, the central part is you get a lot of water drainage. And so you have this kind of groove all along. So you have to ride, you can't ride in it other than the back wheel. So the back wheel's in the ditch and your other two wheels are kind of propped up on the sides. The other thing is a lot of, so it's not very smooth. And then a lot of times you have to ride in the middle, and the two double track lanes are at different heights. So it's not as simple as you would think.
Great. Thanks, Wally. And Bob, do you want to take us through some of your important points in terms of inclusive trail design, and then we'll have some pictures that go along with that as well.
Yes. So, like going back, it seems pretty simple to make, these trails really inclusive going forward, and even retrofitting a lot of the existing trails. Trail width seems to be a key issue here, and some of the narrower trails, every new trail could be built at 42 inches wide. As a contractor, I see some spec'd at 36 inches wide, so keeping the trail width, at that, a good width is key. Berm turns, for cycling, any wheeled user, berm turns are fun. And so when we build those, I think there's a couple minor tweaks that we can do shown in the slides following this that you'll see make it pretty easy to make them very inclusive. Switchback turns make or break a trail for all wheeled users. So just making good turns, really is key for everybody. And then, overall grades, it seems to be like the hand cyclists aren't afraid of some challenging grades here and there, but following general trail specs, I think that's keeping them, with what the industry is following right now. Seems pretty easy to do. And then a lot of times for more purpose-built trails, mountain bike-specific trails, they'll have ride-arounds. Some of the trail features, that might be too difficult for some people. And a lot of times I see those ride-arounds are just narrow. They're afterthoughts to the trail, and they're kind of narrow, but making sure that those are accessible to hand cycles too. So some of the key things I've thought about.
So, yeah, I think, and Maggie or Wally, you can kind of take us through this. Looks like some pretty nice single track that can accommodate our bikes, huh?
Yeah, I think this is what you see very typically on a trail that we ride frequently. It is a wide single track used frequently, but most of the time our wheels are out of that. This is more like a flow trail, and there was a question in the forum about how these bikes do in gravity trails, and I love gravity trails because they're all made wide. And so obviously this is a wide open road, but the single track, typically, I know Bob mentioned about width. Width is very important, but width isn't always necessary. If it's flat, you can do a single track, and we're used to riding outside of the trail. Where width becomes really an issue is on steep traversing. That's where the width becomes important.
Wally, could you talk a little bit about that trail maintenance that you mentioned before about when we start to have sagebrush and other things grow over, and something to think about for our trail development?
Yeah, Bob mentioned that in our last conversation, that if we make a trail 36 inches wide and only 2 hand cyclists ride it now and then, it's going to get overgrown. And so it'll appear to be a narrower track, and it erodes too as well. So, I think as hand cyclists, we have to be more of an advocate too of letting people know, hey, this section would be nice to have some maintenance, but by far, if the trail was originally cut wide, it's very easy to maintain versus trying to modify something later.
Perfect. I think we only have like 5 minutes. Katie, I'm looking at your face, right? So until we get to Q&A. Oh, she's telling us 4, you guys. All right. Go, Bob.
Just going back to trail width, with Wally's comments, it's, if you build that trail at 42 inches, then you have that flat surface for a long time to come, and so we're retrofitting that trail bench, stays, they do get overgrown. But yeah, that's just key. We talked a little bit about camber or the outsloping on a trail, keeping it, within just the industry specs, 2 to 8% seems like pretty easy. Not even, don't really need to adapt for that. It's just already in something we do. And just kind of seems like easy. Berms, in-slope turns. A lot of times on the top part of this, we see the berms are kind of pretty narrow in the bottom part of it, and which I've heard some, maybe really difficult for a lot of hand cyclists to navigate. Easy adaptation is just make the bottom part of that turn 4 feet wide or 3 feet wide. We need the dirt to build the berm anyway, and then that allows a nice gradual curvature in the bottom of it to allow for a lot of different user abilities, from slow to fast riders. So, yeah.
I think, Wally, this is your picture, Wally, I think, from a turn that's a little tight. I think you're muted, Wally. Wally, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So this is a tight switchback with no berm and very loose terrain. So there were some comments about turn radius. I think the turn radius of a switchback is very important, but it doesn't have to be a full radius for these hand bikes. They are longer, but there are ways to negotiate through that. Having a berm makes a switchback much more easier to negotiate versus that prior picture where it would be easy to lose grip on that.
And Bob, did you want to comment on this slide?
Yeah, so as trail builder, I always look for good places to build turns. The mellower the side slope, the better, because then you have more control over the radius of the turn. On steep side slopes, like this picture here, on the downhill part of this turn it's dropped off pretty steep. So we moved a lot of dirt from the top of this turn to the bottom third of this turn, and that's actually probably 3 feet of dirt stacked at the bottom part of this turn. That helps build the radius out, and it alleviates a lot of elevation gain in the turn too, which can make a challenging turn. So, you can build turns on steep terrain, but generally speaking, the steeper the terrain, the tighter the radius is going to be, more elevation gain in the turn, and all that. So just looking for good terrain or good places to build turns. And when you do have to build one on steep terrain, just move a lot of dirt from the top to the bottom. Here's a berm we built a couple years ago. This is 4 feet in the bottom, nice flat level, and it goes up pretty steep. You know, it just seems it just offers a lot of variety for people. So.
And Wally, I think this is your picture as well. So this is an interesting obstacle that I think you can barely make, right?
Actually, that picture before, that's the narrow one. The one the subsequent one is the wide one. This was the wide bridge. The other one was a narrow bridge. So this one, so yeah, we talked about ride-arounds. This one, can you go to prior? So that one is about a 2-foot wide bridge. And so I had to go to the right and through the bushes to get to the trail. That's not much of an issue, but if there is a gully there or a river, becomes an issue, and there's no, so even things like that, a little wider bridge.
Yeah, great. And I don't want Katie to get mad, so we're going to just kind of finish up the last couple slides here. And I did want to sort of end with some really nice pictures from this whole group about some pretty tricky terrain that isn't something that people want to go away. There's some fun stuff out there that people are tackling with some of this new gear and the suspension and everything that's out there. I think people would be surprised about what people are tackling and getting over. So I think, like Tracy mentioned earlier, we don't want everything beginner. No one wants everything smooth. We just have to think about some of these things that we were talking about today. Is that you, Wally?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So some really cool stuff. I know that in the chat there was also, these are the last 2 slides. Tracy, do you want to just briefly touch on, this attempt at really starting to have a ratings and classification system?
Sure. I'll share the info, as I'm not the expert on this, but what we want you to take away is there are some ratings and classification systems out there that are being used. One in Canada. We're giving you some resources at the end, and we hope that could be the next step. Continuing to move and work together on everything from signage to entry points into rating systems. There's Trail Forks, which shows some awesome information and trail information that's helpful, but continuing to be a collaborative group to partner together so that more people can know what is appropriate for their skill level and what will work for them is really what we'd like in these next steps.
Great. And I think since we're out of time and we want to save some moments for questions, we just want to end a little bit with the ideas about a future collaboration. I know everyone is excited to have a demo day or multiple days where we can get people on these bikes. We have dozens of these bikes at least in the Salt Lake area. So whether it's local or we come to you, we'd love to do it. And we'd love additional topics like adaptive water recreation in the future. I know we've included a decent resource guide. I'm sure it's not definitive. I've seen in the chat some people leaving some other great resources. So I know this is going on YouTube, but maybe also can be emailed so that people can use these live links. So I'll stop there and I'll just let this run in the background. And back to you, Katie. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. I think that big takeaways, we could use another 2 hours diving into this topic. I think this is really exciting and even inspiring information. And I remember the first time I watched a recumbent mountain bike hit the trail, and I was totally blown away by the exhilaration and the excitement and the skill of that rider. But I want to leave time to move into a Q&A. The audience has been great at putting questions in the chat. I'll give you a moment to formulate those thoughts and drop any other questions that you have. So I'll get things started with the first question, and I actually want to direct this towards Maggie. Maggie, as an adaptive rider, can you share with us what it's like to plan a ride with friends, maybe going to a new trail system that you've never been to before?
Yeah, so going to a trail that I've been to before with friends is easy because I know the spots that I'm going to need spotting, or if I know it's already adapted or it's long or wide enough. But when I'm planning a ride with somewhere I've never been before, I have to bring people with me who are capable of flipping me back over if I tip, or being able to know where to spot me, or so just bringing capable riders with me is really important for trying new trails, and just being mentally ready for an adventure. We like call it adventure riding because you never, with new trails, you just never know what kind of things you're going to come up against. So yeah, just like being prepared is the main thing for trying new trails, and having the people with me that I'm confident in to help assist me. And that's mainly what's important when going on a new trail.
It seems like there's far more considerations than an upright rider might have to think about to understand what they're getting into, and maybe challenges of where to find that information. Bob, as I wait for more questions to fall into the chat, I'm curious, as you've really stepped into the forefront of designing more accessible trails, what's been some of your biggest hurdles in learning how to design trails intended for adaptive cycles?
Well, I think a hurdle was just thinking that, we had to do something special and different, really for adaptive cycles. And I mean, to me, this is exciting that it can be really easy to make these trails available and inclusive for all kinds of disabilities and everything. It's kind of what we do already. We just have to be careful to make sure that, everything is wide enough and the turns are good enough and on all that. That's kind of exciting. To me, it's pretty simple. We just have to get everybody on board on, in the past building trails, we didn't really think about too much about adaptive cycles, because I went to a seminar once about, ADA specs for natural surface trails, and it was just something that, was kind of out there a little bit, and wasn't quite achievable for, everybody. So that this is really cool that this is a direction that this sport's headed.
Thank you, Bob. And it maybe bouncing over to Tracy, I'm curious what advice you might have for a land manager, a trail organization, or others who feel that there isn't enough need to justify establishing more accessible trails in their area.
I think what I would push out is when I mentioned earlier, 1 in 4 people have a disability. This is the one demographic we can all join. So a loved one, yourself, as we age, we might need a piece of adaptive equipment as well. And so thinking ahead in that and knowing the benefits that we all receive with that more easy access that you talked about, Katie, in your question to Maggie, even transportation to that trailhead and taking our equipment it's not as much as what Maggie and Wally have to think about of transporting their adaptive bike. And so having that understanding and what Bob said, that combination of it's a little bit of change to make a huge difference. And then to be honest, I would say you need to come out and join us here at the National Ability Center. Our senior manager staff will take you out on those bikes and show you what it's all about. Trails will support you in that, Wasatch Adaptive. Come and join us. Let us show you and how you feel that. And you will gain an appreciation and understanding of what a difference you'll make with your trail system.
I think this is a great question in the chat from Kevin. What, and possibly Bob, you might know the answer to this. What would be the cost differential for building a more inclusive trail?
None. In my book, I mean, really, I don't see it being any much different from what, the direction this group is headed. It's what we build, and we just have to make sure that, the land managers maybe tightening up the specs a little bit and making sure, that maybe some turns have some specifications, which I think are just good trail building specifications anyway. So I don't see any cost in increases for this. So that's my opinion.
Not a financial deterrent from thinking with all abilities in mind. Wally, we had another question from the audience about horse encounters. You've spent an awful lot of time across the state and other states on trail. What thoughts do you have about right-of-way and yielding and multiple use trails?
I think I've encountered just about everything out there, and moose, horses, and horses, I think, are they do look a bit spooked. I haven't had any rear up on me, but I try to just go slow, and I think they're used to seeing bikers. But I think hikers are also probably what you're going to see the majority of. And with hikers, you know, and other bikers are very good about yielding to us because they see us as a big thing with 3 wheels. But at the same time, I try to yield to hikers. I mean, basically it's common trail courtesy. There was a question about, you know, are there guidelines? I think it just comes down to what people normally do. I think the more you treat us like a regular mountain biker, and we should be subject to all the courtesies as well. I don't think there's really anything that needs to be made as an exception. But horses, as long as they're a certain distance away, I haven't come right up on one going downhill, but most of the time the horses are not in these trails, but occasionally they are in the area.
I'll throw this, one of our last questions out to the whole panel, whoever wants to take this one on. But for folks on the webinar who might already be involved in fully established trails, what could they do today or tomorrow to improve, maintain, or even increase accessibility to their local trails?
I'll go first because I'm not good with awkward silences. I would encourage you to invite an adaptive rider out, connect with us as partners, and invite someone who utilizes that equipment all the time to come out and give you some feedback and work together on, you know, we're not asking for every trail to be accessible, but if you have one that you think, I think this could be the place, then let's partner together and support each other and figure out what will work.
Thank you all. I think this time together has been really enlightening and also very empowering, and I want to thank our panelists, Tracy, Jeff, Wally, Bob, Maggie, for sharing your expertise, your stories, and your insights. With those still on the call, I would encourage you to use the chat to drop in any other thoughts that you would like to learn more about when it comes to adaptive recreation as we plan out additional webinars, whether that's more related to foot traffic or water sports or anything in the realm of adaptive recreation. And within our last few minutes, we want to also share just a few quick reminders. Tara, I might jump in and remind for you. We want to make sure everyone's aware of the Outdoor Recreation Summit occurring later this year. We have a session both in Logan, Utah, September 22nd through 23rd, and in Kanab, October 27th through 28th. We hope if you're not already signed up, you'll jump online at UtahOutdoorSummit.com and register to attend those events. In addition to the Outdoor Recreation Summit, the Utah Trails Forum is offering an additional add-on to come out and learn more about trail building, trail planning, getting guidance and networking for being able to keep up with best practices and tips related to trails here in Utah. If you have any further questions for the Utah Trails Forum Steering Committee, please reach out to us. We can drop our emails in the chat. I want to thank everybody who's been listening, watching, and engaging today. I know that there's at least one person in every audience member's lives who can or one day will benefit from more inclusive and accessible trails. So I'm really, really grateful to you all for your time and your energy, and I hope that there's at least one thing that's changed your life, or at least in the way that you think about accessible trails today. Thank you all so much.
Hey, Katie, can I make just a quick comment?
Please.
There was a question by Graydon about, do you ride, existing trails? So this last video, these last 2 videos are a trail that I've been on. This is not an quote, an adaptive trail. This is just a trail that's out there in North Fork near Liberty, up by, in the Ogden Mountains. This is not an, adaptive trail. This is what a good trail that's been recently cut, and we can ride all those. So no, I don't want people to get the wrong idea that this trail here is made for an adaptive rider. No, this is a regular trail that anybody rides.
I think, Wally, that's a really great takeaway for today is we're not asking for an exclusive adaptive trail system, just more consideration and thought of how you create more access into trails that already exist and allow more people to get out and ride with their friends and their family now and in the future.